Ladies and gentlemen, I am very happy that today we are holding the Kyiv Security Forum. We've organized an honorary lecture by Oleksandra Matviichuk, head of the board of the Center for Civil Liberties, a winner of the Nobel Peace Prize 2022. I give the floor to the head of the Kyiv Security Forum, Arseniy Yatsenyuk. Esteemed ladies and gentlemen, I'm very happy to see you all. Thank you, Oleksandra, for the opportunity to make time and address us with her address with which she addressed the whole world. Our today's event would not have happened if it wasn't for the Ukrainian armed forces and the Ukrainian nation who defended since 2014 our land from the Russian onslaught. I would like to ask you to pay homage to their memory by a minute of silence. Thank you. Oleksandra, you know, I've always dreamed that Ukraine would someday have a Nobel Peace Prize, and it happened. You are the person who is an embodiment of Ukraine on the world arena. This Nobel Peace Prize is an acknowledgement of your work and the millions of Ukrainians across our country. This is the recognition of the Ukrainian civil society, which back in 2014 on Maidan, and it is from the civil society that Maidan started, stood up to defend Ukraine's freedom and independence. The civil society which headed the fight against corruption in Ukraine, the civil society which has turned into a great united Ukrainian nation, including volunteers and each and every citizen in Ukraine, people who know the value of freedom and the value of Ukraine's independence. I'm sure that this is not the last Nobel Prize awarded to Ukraine. I hope that this prize will come to the whole free world. When I speak about the free world, I mean the United States of America and the President of the USA, all the leaders of the EU countries, all the leaders of the free world who have embarked on the right side of history, who are supporting our fight for ours and your freedom. This is our joint fight. I hope that this Nobel Prize will be awarded for establishing a new world order. And in this world order, there will be no place for tyrants. For them, there will be only one place reserved, in a new Hague or a new Nuremberg. The world will be free from the energy blackmail. It'll be free of dictatorship and tyranny. And I do believe that there will be yet one more Nobel Prize. And this Nobel Prize will be dedicated to the Ukrainian people, to the Ukrainian president, to the Ukrainian armed forces, to the Ukrainian military command, and for all our united Ukrainian nation. This Nobel Prize will be for peace and freedom of the whole, of all the free world, for the liberated Ukraine, for the fact that democracy will triumph over the darkness of Russia's dictatorship. We will definitely prevail. And these prizes that we deserve will be celebrated by all of us together. Glory to Ukraine. It is my pleasure to give the floor to our friend, Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary, Mrs. Bridget BRINK. Good evening.
Warm welcome. It's great to be with you all tonight. Ms. Matviichuk, I am so honored to be here today with you to introduce your lecture in commemoration of Ukraine's Day of Unity. Oleksandra is a powerful advocate for Ukraine, for respect for human rights, and for the values we share. You and your colleagues give me energy and strength, and I appreciate the power of your voices. In recent weeks, Oleksandra has used the platform and the recognition the Center for Civil Liberties and all of Ukraine's civil society have earned to speak with clarity, directness, and strength. I am proud to be able to introduce her on stage and to lend my own voice in support of Ukraine, its victory on the battlefield, and a future for this country that Ukraine has fought so hard to realize. So today I want to say clearly, the United States supports Ukraine in this existential fight. We will be your partners in winning the war against Russia's aggression. We will support you in building a future worthy of the sacrifices you have made. And we are proud to be a friend and partner to Ukraine, exemplified by Oleksandra. So first, winning the war. I know Ukraine will prevail because of the strength of your people and because of your relentless determination. Today, as Ukraine continues to fight across the front lines, your determination energizes our resolve. And based on the solid foundation of bipartisan support in the American Congress and the generosity of the American people, the United States will continue to stand with you, as President Biden has so often said, for as long as it takes. While Putin remains in isolation in Russia, President Zelensky traveled to the United States last month to meet with President Biden and to speak to the United States Congress, a powerful sign that we stand together in this strategic partnership. The United States and our allies and partners have continued ramping up assistance to Ukraine, not only on the military side, but also to aid Ukrainian infrastructure and help its millions of displaced people. Our economic support continues through $13 billion in direct budget support and other measures, including to help support salaries for hundreds of thousands of teachers, healthcare workers, and emergency workers. We have provided civilian sector assistance to Ukraine's law enforcement bodies. We've provided almost, $27.5 billion in military assistance since January 2021. More than $26.8 billion of that since Russia launched its premeditated, unprovoked, and brutal war on February 24th. So we stand in solidarity with more than 50 countries supporting Ukraine's defense. And just this past week in Germany, we all saw how the world has united to continue providing the necessary military equipment for Ukraine to defend its people and its freedom against Russia. What I can pledge to you is that more is coming. Every day there are announcements of new kinds of military aid coming to Ukraine, from HIMARS to Patriots to Bradley and Stryker fighting vehicles. Russia chose this war and could end it today. Until it does, we stand with all Ukrainians and will provide the assistance Ukraine needs to win this war. Russia does not and cannot have a right to dictate any country's policy, borders, or future. Only once Russia understands this fundamental point will Ukraine be secure in its internationally recognized borders and fully free to build its prosperous and democratic future, integrated into Europe in support of the desire of the Ukrainian people. The United States is fully behind you in a fight for a future in which you, the people of Ukraine, have the power to choose your path. And I want to quote President Zelensky from his address just yesterday. The strength of society and the strength of the state are based on justice. President Zelensky stressed the role of journalists and of law enforcement in ensuring that there can be no return to prior times. and the United States fully supports this. There is no room in the coming Ukraine that you are all building for those who would divert the state's resources for their own interests. Oleksandra once mentioned that the health of a society can be measured by the balance of private means spent to benefit the public interests versus the alternative, public means spent to benefit private interests. I could not agree more with her words and with President Zelensky's words. Both know that in a strong society, people understand and uphold their responsibilities to one another. These words are not founded in a blind faith. It is a faith rooted in years of living in a country that has wanted to take its rightful place in the Euro-Atlantic family and not to remain on the outskirts. It is rooted in years of work and fighting for dignity and justice. I believe those lessons, as well as the hard-won lessons of Russia's full-scale war against Ukraine, have mobilized Ukrainians in pursuit of a state and a government that is accountable to all of its people. And we, the United States, will continue to support Ukraine in its efforts to reform and ensure institutions are responsible to the needs of the many, not of the few. To stamp out corrupt interests, to continue to build a government that offers everyone the same opportunity to succeed. These are values we share. These are the values that motivated the founding documents of the United States. I know these are the values that take a tremendous amount of work to put into practice, work that can never be finished, because democracy requires energy, effort, and relentless determination. These are the values on which a just peace and a just state must be built. And we support the vision and effort of Ukrainians to achieve these goals. One of the reasons Oleksandra's voice rings so powerfully is her consistent message that knowing the future can only be built on responsibility and justice, on respect for human rights and an end to impunity. This is a fitting topic today as we commemorate a day more than a century ago when the people of Ukraine, long separated by imperial ambition, became a single modern Ukrainian state. I know that Ukraine's desire for unity, for freedom, invigorates your fight against Russia's full-scale invasion. Regardless of what Putin says about why he launched this unprovoked and appalling war, he is really fighting against the right of Ukraine and Ukrainians to chart their own path and to choose their own destiny. I know Ukraine will prevail because of the strength and ingenuity of its people and because of your dedication and dignity, qualities that Oleksandra and her colleagues embody. She has been a friend and a partner to so many, and it gives me great pleasure to be here today to honor her profound contributions. Many on our embassy team, past and present, who know her, draw inspiration from her and speak of her ability to lead by example, to do so with a quiet dignity and respect. Oleksandra has the courage of her convictions and is using her voice to, as she says, bridge the responsibility gap and make justice possible for all the affected people, to quote her own Nobel lecture. I know that Oleksandra represents an entire team of committed people at the Center for Civil Liberties, a team whose qualities echo hers and who have demonstrated their bravery and commitment for years. These are the qualities that make it so right for her to deliver an address in commemoration of the Day of Ukrainian Unity and the strength of the Ukrainian people. It is this unity of the country that has brought Ukraine to an important point in the war. And it is this unity and a shared vision of the future that will secure Ukraine for generations to come. In closing, the United States stands with Ukraine and the people of Ukraine to help you win a just peace, a peace that ensures those who rebuild from the destruction of this war need not fear that the war will return, where they know that those who have begun this war will be held to account for the horror they have brought to this country and its people. We are proud to help enable your success and your resilience, not only through our direct support, but also by rallying partners across the world to stand strong with Ukraine. We are proud to have you as friends and our partners. And we will support Ukraine in winning this just peace. And then we will help Ukraine and Ukrainians build a just future. And we will maintain that commitment to Ukraine's success and Ukraine's choice in the fight for the present and for the future. Дякую. Thank you. And Oleksandr, we very much look forward to hearing your remarks. Thank you.
Наш ворог має розуміти, що ми будемо битись.
Our enemy must understand that we will fight and we will win. The society should be mobilized. We must unite on the basis of this national platform. We can hear that there is a fighting at the airport. Don't panic, we're strong, we are prepared, so everything we will prevail, because this is Ukraine. Russian war. Worship.
Stop Putin now, because tomorrow it will not help you, because Russian war against NATO is already happening. The battlefield is Ukraine.
We have to understand it's about a collective responsibility of Russian Federation. Not only Putin is responsible for what is happening on our land.
Everybody should understand, Putin declared the war not for Ukraine. Putin declared the war to the whole world.
We can win and we can defeat Russia.
Putin is to lose everything in case if Ukraine wins. And I want to be very clear that Ukraine is to win.
Добрый день, everybody. I'm Boris Johnson from London.
The American people have been with you every step of the way, and we will stay with you. We will stay with you for as long as it takes.
Бабулечка, це вам дякую.
Помоліться за українського воїна, який зараз в окопі з собою захищає світ від біди.
Дякую вам, Херсонська Україна!
Я звертаюся до вас з Києва. Навіть зараз я чую звуки обстрілів довкола нашого міста.
Сполучені Штати працюють разом з союзниками, щоб забезпечити усебічну допомогу звідусіль.
Оборону ми тримаємо і, незважаючи ні на що, продовжуємо далі.
We are keeping our defenses and will continue fighting in spite of anything. I'm proud of the soldiers who put inhuman efforts to hold the enemy at bay.
Журнал Time назвав людиною року президента Зеленського та
Time magazine named President Zelensky and Ukrainian spirit the person of the year. You don't need to be Ukrainians to support Ukraine. It's enough just to be a human being.
Прошу привітати Нобелівську лауреатку.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the laureate of the Nobel Prize, Oleksandra Matviichuk. For me, it's a great honor to speak here. And I would like to thank Ukrainian armed forces and all volunteers in Ukraine for this opportunity. I'm a human rights activist, and this is my vision of the world in which every person has dignity, rights and freedoms, and this means this influences in what way a person acts and takes decisions. For some reason, there is an opinion in the world that people who defend human rights don't have to use legitimate force for self-defense or to stop violation of human rights. That's why often at the international fora, when I'm asking and calling upon giving Ukraine modern weapons, I see that people are surprised. I can understand those who read in the newspapers that the Nobel Prize Laureate calls upon giving Ukraine combat tanks, but the values of modern civilization need to be defended. And at the moment, myself, as a person who has been dedicating more than 20 years of my life to protection of human rights and freedoms, have no instruments to stop the atrocities of Russians. My vision of the world has been formed under the influence of Ukrainian dissidents. I entered this community thanks to my teacher and the prisoner of Soviet camps, the writer and philosopher Yevhen ZAKHAROV. This is an unusual community of people who made enormous influence on my life and on what I'm doing now. No, they didn't quote the articles of the European Convention on Human Rights, or they didn't quote the norms of international treaties. No, they just gave an example as people who fought for freedom and human dignity and paid big price for that. People who lived the way they teach how to live, and they did what they talked about. And through this example, I decided to enter the legal university, Shevchenko University, the Department of Legal Studies. But then later I realized that when you live in Ukraine, if you have legal knowledge, it's not enough. It's in Switzerland. You may defend your rights and freedoms in the court. In Ukraine, to be a human rights activist means that except legal knowledge, you must have other knowledge. You must understand how to organize information campaigns. You must at least understand some basics of human psychology in order to talk to people who suffered gross crimes. You must understand the way international system operates in order to organize advocacy campaigns. You must find energy which you have to inject into this international system, which is not operational, for it to move in the right direction.
But the most important thing is not even the skill or knowledge, but the strength of spirit. And the next part of my lecture will be dedicated to the things related to the world outlook, because it is the strength of the Ukrainian spirit that helped us to withstand and helps us to keep on fighting against Russia's aggression. While after the beginning of the large-scale invasion, not just Russia, but even the civilized world were sure that Ukraine would fall. And this strength of the Ukrainian spirit determines our future victory, no matter when it's going to come. We were the first human rights organization which dispatched mobile groups to document war crimes in February and March 2014 in Crimea, in Donetsk and Luhansk regions. I deal with documenting, I have been dealing with documenting war crimes for 9 years already. Since the beginning of the large-scale invasion, we encountered an unprecedented number of war crimes. But I always say that we record not just the violation of the Hague or Geneva Conventions. We document human pain. Like shelling of evacuation corridors, the creation by Russia of a system of filtration camps, purposeful destruction of residential houses, churches, hospitals, killings, rapes, torture, and kidnapping of civilians on the occupied territories. As Russia uses war crimes as a method of waging this war, they're trying to break our resolve and to occupy Ukraine through inhuman suffering of civilians. That's why we document all those sufferings, to make sure that sooner or later Putin and the leadership of Russia, the top military command of the Russian Federation, and all the Russians who committed those crimes with their own hands be brought to justice and punished. During the first years of the war, I asked myself why they're so cruel. I worked with people who survived captivity, and they told me absolutely horrible things. They told me how they were beaten, how they were raped, how they were enclosed in wooden boxes, how they had their limbs cut off, how they were made to write with their own blood. One woman told me how she had one of her eyes taken out with a spoon. And this cruelty, which is a part of Russia's culture, is not accidental. I recall a well-known sociological experiment, which is quite a cruel one, when an animal, I think that was a dog, was prohibited from eating by electric current. Every time when the dog reached out to food, it was hit with electric current. And finally, it ended up in a situation when this poor animal decided to starve to death rather than fight for its survival. And that experiment was called a learned helplessness. And it appears to me that now Russians are carrying out this awful experiment over the whole Ukrainian nation. They want to cause so much pain to us so that we would stop resisting. But they've miscalculated. And if you take a look at any sociological poll, when Ukrainians are asked about values, the top of the list is the value of freedom. And this is the world outlook direction, which is the core of the Ukrainian spirit. And now in this war against the Russian Federation, we're fighting for freedom in all meanings of this word. Because these values is something that determines our conduct not when things are easy, but when things are hard. And just like Ukrainian dissidents way back in the past, today we are paying the ultimate price for freedom. In this fight for freedom, we're standing on the shoulders not just of our predecessors of previous generations. This fight has been going on for centuries, but we also stand firm on our practical experience. And I'd like to share with you several stories, which are stories of real life for me and very important. The first one is the initiative of establishing Euromaidan SOS initiative, which we launched after the peaceful students' demonstration or rally on Maidan was beaten up. We worked 24/7 at that time. We united several thousands of people across Ukraine, and every day hundreds and hundreds of people who were beaten up, arrested, tortured, or had criminal cases framed up for them. They were the people that we worked with. And at that point, we came out against a whole state machinery because the so-called titushkas cooperated with prosecutors cooperated with the courts, and the then president and the parliament were against the peaceful protest. They wanted to destroy it, even physically. And at that time, it was very easy to say, what can I do? The law doesn't work. And to get daunted and stop doing that. But since our volunteers and our lawyers very honestly fought for each individual, for every victim, finally we started working not at the legal but at the symbolic level, which creates new meanings of this fight. And every person on Maidan knew that there are no guarantees for our security at all. You can get arrested, you can be abducted, you can be killed, but there are people who will fight for you and will never abandon you. And this understanding made us strong to overcome fear. So, my first lesson of life lies in the conclusion that even when your efforts and your fight for freedom and human dignity appears to be senseless just because of the overwhelming force that you are fighting against, you have to carry on nevertheless, and the result will come sooner or later. Another real-life story is a story of the global action Save Oleksandra, which was launched by my team and myself when the well-known Ukrainian film director Oleksandra announced a hunger strike, as he was in the north of Russia, in Labetnange, in a camp, and he was totally incommunicado there, and he demanded that all the Ukrainian political captives in Russia be liberated. We wanted to make his voice heard, and for that purpose we united people in more than 35 countries of the world into a global action. And we started this action with simultaneous rallies, when in 35 countries of the world, people took to the downtown squares with demands not to abstract figure of Putin, but to their national governments with the ideas of what they should do in order to help liberate Oleksandr and other captives. And finally, that was a success. And the fact that in 2019, Oleksandr and another 34 captives came back to Ukraine was the result of the effort of hundreds and hundreds of people across the world who supported that global action, global effort. But that action started with one individual, with Oleksandr, who, I will remind you, was imprisoned in far north of the Russian Federation and had no instruments at his disposal, just the strength of his word and his resolute position. So my conclusion is that even if for a fight we have nothing else but our voice and our strong stand, we have to use that, because your voice and your stand is a lot. And the third lesson of mine is about people. When the large-scale invasion started, we all witnessed how international organizations, even humanitarian ones, evacuated their staff to safer places, to more secure places, whereas ordinary people stayed on, and they started working and helped people to survive. They organized evacuation from the towns and villages which were encircled by Russians. They were getting people from under the rubble after shelling of residential houses. They helped others to survive in bomb shelters and supported each other in the conditions where there was no medical assistance, no electricity, no light, no nothing. I wouldn't wish on anybody to go through this experience, but those dramatic times made it possible for us to show our best, to be courageous, to fight for freedom, and to make complicated, difficult, but right decisions. Now, maybe as never before, we feel what it's like what it means to be human beings. And I know that many ordinary people are very humble, evaluating their contribution into our freedom and our democratic choice, because we are fighting against a formidable force. That is why I appeal to the image which was created on Maidan, when the Ukrainian artists created a placard, "I am a drop in the ocean." Well, that's right. Each and every one of us is a drop in the ocean. But that means that even though I cannot stop this war by my own efforts, but without my effort, nothing will change. And the third lesson which I drew from my experience means that when you cannot rely on legal instruments, you can always rely on people.
Because people have much bigger impact than they think, and the massive mobilization of people in different countries of the world can change the course of the international history much quicker than interference of the United Nations. And I would like to dwell upon a very important issue of what are we fighting for? Because this war began not in February 2022. This war began in February 2014, when Ukraine got a chance for quick democratic transformations. And in order to stop us on this way, Putin started this war, occupied Crimea and parts of Luhansk and Donetsk oblasts, because Putin is afraid not of NATO, he is afraid of the idea of liberty, freedom, which came closer to the borders of Russia. That's why a victory for Ukraine is not just to repel Russian troops from Ukrainian territory or to restore international order, to liberate Crimea and other temporarily occupied territories. The victory for Ukraine means to be successful in democratic transformations in our country. And we must remember this. It's complicated work even at peacetime, not to speak about the war and full-fledged aggression, and we all feel a very acute threat to our survival. But we don't have a luxury of postponing the democratic transformation of the country till the time of peace after the war. And naturally, usually during the wartime, there is a temptation to become a mirror, to mirror the behavior of the opposing party, especially if this opposing party violates international rules and principles. That's why it's very important for us not to transform into Russia even when we win this war. There is no sense in doing this. And I would like to remind the audience, to our international partners, what we are fighting jointly in this war, which is not a war between two countries, but it's a war between two systems, authoritarianism and democracy, because Putin wants to persuade the whole world, not only Ukrainians, that democracy, human rights, and rule of law are fake values, because during the war they do not protect you. And we must answer something to this dimension of civilization conflict. And for this we should do two things. The first, we used to live in the illusion that we have an international system of security, but Ukraine is a vivid example of not operational system. When the Secretary General of the United Nations comes to Kyiv to meet with the President Zelensky, that day the Russian missile hits residential house, residential building, and kills our colleague, journalist Vera Kharich. So we see that in this world, our safety, our security, and respect to humans depend not on the international order, but on the military capabilities of the country in which a human being lives. That's why we must start radical reform of international system of peace and security. And this reform, the start of the reform should become an important symbolic step. We must exclude Russia from the UN Security Council for systematic violation of the statute of the UN. And the second point, the second thing which we should do together in order to demonstrate that rule of law, democracy, and human rights function, we must demonstrate justice. We must get justice because there will not be sustainable peace in our region without justice, where Russia for decades has been using war in order to reach its geopolitical goals and military crimes as means to win this war. And now, when we are facing a huge number of military crimes, of war crimes, which cannot be digested even by the best legal system in the world, we need international support. We need international tribunal which would bring Putin, Lukashenko and other war criminals to responsibility. Then we'll be able to say, and we'll be very honest, yes, there was a period when nothing was functional. No legal mechanisms could stop Russian aggression. And even Nobel Peace Prize laureates or human rights activists asked different countries and called different countries upon giving us modern weapons. But we managed to bring Putin and other war criminals from Russia to responsibility. And in conclusion, I would like to appeal to the citizens of Ukraine. I have never been so proud to be Ukrainian before. And I would like to say that what our country will be at a time of the victory definitely depends on our fight today. When we speak about democratic transformation, it's not just taking good laws or setting up new institutions with good names. The values of the society are stronger. That's why we have to change the way of our thinking and bring into our world outlook more human rights perspective. Otherwise, we may repeat the situation when we fight against authoritarian regimes, reach certain success, prevail over authoritarian regimes, and then are not able to do our homework and to build such democratic institutions which would make our children safe and for them not to need to continue this struggle. And here we may speak about what Angus Madison said, who studied transformation of countries and who indicated that there are countries which try to modernize by they hit with their heads against invisible rock, fall down, and then appear on the same trajectory. That's why we need to leap forward in order to get out of that turbulence in which Ukraine has been for decades. Otherwise, we are paying too much price for just a right to build a country which authorities are responsible, the courts are independent, and students who rally for their rights are not beaten. And this is our joint responsibility. I always remind myself this story since the times of Maidan, when after the shooting people, the relatives of the Heavenly 100 spoke at the court litigations. Maybe you remember young boy Roman Hurik, nice-looking, with curly hair boy who was killed on Institutska Street. In the court, I listened to his mom. It was very hard to listen to his mom because she told us that after her son was killed, they brought his backpack to her, and she found paper wraps of sweets in his backpack because her boy was very well behaved and didn't throw away these wrappers just on the ground. And she said that as a mother, she didn't want her son to go to Maidan because, like any mom, she feared for his life and health. But then she remembered that 10 years before that, she stood herself on Orange Maidan, and she said that she didn't have any moral right to refuse him, not to allow him to go to Maidan. So I would like to say that I wish that our generation should be the last generation which is forced to stand for freedom, democracy, human rights and other values of the Western civilization, paying such a high price. We should take over this responsibility ourselves. We should not put this responsibility on our children. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Oleksandra, and on behalf of Kyiv Security Forum, on behalf of all present here, I want to thank you. Please take your seats. I want to thank you for your mission of Sverstyuk. I would like to thank you for your words. We all hear in these words the great invincible power of our nation. As you said, you want this generation to be the last one which is fighting for freedom and democracy. Let our generation, all our people, all present here, become the first generation which prevails, which wins. And for us, it's a great honor to mention a very important guest who joined us at this event. These guests are symbols of our struggle. These are heroes, our warriors from Azovstal. Captain Ivan Ignatiev, deputy commander of Azov Regiment. This is Junior Lieutenant Hamlet Samolenko, deputy commander. Sergeant Major Mikhailo Dianov and Katerina Prokopenko, wife of Radis, Denis Prokopenko, hero of Ukraine. Katerina, the floor is yours, and please join her.
Mariupoля.
86 days of the liberation of Mariupol. Regiment Azov and other formations of the Ukrainian armed forces defended the city, defended the values and freedom of Ukraine. It was an unequal fight. Ukraine's military were heavily outnumbered, but their spirit was much stronger than that of the enemy, and they did the impossible. Our military made a big sacrifice for all of us to be able to get together here. We can speak a lot about the crimes of Russia, but just imagine that all crimes of the world were focused there. Marauding, looting, rape, killings, destruction of civilian facilities. Dan Zvonek was taken captive by Russians. He was tortured to death, and the pictures were sent to his mother. In April, as we saw the pictures of Mariupol, we decided with the wives of 4 fighters of Azovstal, we decided to go to the Pope and to tell him about the situation, but the evacuation failed because Russia blocked all that effort. And then there was an order to surrender. That was then followed the Leninka, one of the most tragic pages in the history of our military. That was the planned terrorist act of Russia. They were killing people en masse because those killings is what they thrive on. Will there be a punishment? The Red Cross keeps failing to show up at the camps where Ukrainian captives are being held. Understanding all that situation, we created an association of relatives of Azovstal fighters to advocate for their rights. We cannot diminish the role of women in this fight. Women who are waiting for their loved ones can reach as high as Mars and move earth and heaven. We cannot stand on the sidelines. We cannot put up with these crimes, especially those which are committed against Azovstal fighters. We know what Russia is capable of and how they treat prisoners of war. It's impossible to imagine that in civilized countries of the world like Germany or the US, anything like that would happen. About 170 Azov fighters are still in captivity. Many of them are wounded. Many of them are women. I would like to ask each and every one of you to make your contribution into this effort to liberate the heroes and to support those who have been liberated. Because Mariupol and Azovstal have shown to the whole world what people who believe in their motherlands are capable and able to do. It is important to understand that the living should be fighting for the dead, the healthy should be fighting for the sick, and the free should be fighting for those in captivity. Glory to Ukraine, glory to the heroes. Thank you very much. I would like to give the floor to the Deputy Commander, a hero of Azovstal, Ilya Samoilenko, call sign Handel. Good evening. I never prepare speeches because there's no point, actually, and I will only say that today we are invited here not just as a decoration. I sincerely hope so. And I would like to emphasize that today we are really in a situation when our position determines all the rest. There are a lot of words spoken, as a rule, a lot of right words, but those words should be translated into actions. I am a military person. All my actions are subordinated just to one idea, and now there's a lot is being done to continue this effort. War is going to go on for some time, and the things that we're talking about today, war crimes and all other atrocities of the Russian Federation, we've seen all that with our own eyes. We know that their military tactics is based on terror and genocide, and from the military point of view, those actions are pointless. When you orient it towards the killing of civilians, you will understand that this is something that has nothing to do with military purposes. And it's very straightforward. Talking about our formation, we will never stop until we will bring back our city, our Mariupol, our home. We will not remain in history as heroes of one battle. Our battles are still ahead, And for that, we need to accumulate and unite a lot of efforts, a lot of resources. People get exhausted. Please try not to exhaust all your strengths. Try to distribute your inner resources and use them wisely, because we need to fight in the long haul. Keep your eyes open and understand what you're doing. This primarily is related to the military. As to civilians, please be very careful, because unlike 2014, when patriotic spirit lasted for half a year or so, now we're dealing with a war of attrition, and we cannot afford letting our spirits to fizzle out. We should win a victory. There's no other way, and we know the price that we will have to pay for that. The ruthless attitude to the enemy is good, but we should not turn ourselves into the likes of them. We should remain human. We should remain alive. So we have to be cruel towards the enemy, but at the same time, we should not whet our cruelty to the point when it starts devouring yourselves. Thank you very much. Thank you. Our event is dedicated also to the Day of Unity of Ukraine. I recall when a year ago we held a roundtable discussion, and we spoke about unity of the country, about mobilization of our resources, about our ability to resist the enemy. And it is something which we're going to continue discussing now, which will be a follow-up on what Oleksandra Matviichuk spoke about in her lecture. And while our colleagues are getting this stage ready, I would like to introduce the participants in this discussion about war, victory, and the future. Yevhen ZAKHAROV, head of the board of the Ukrainian Helsinki Union for Human Rights. Volodymyr YERMOLENKO, head of the Ukrainian PEN and the editor-in-chief of UkraineWorld. Valeriy PEKAR, co-founder of Nova Ukraina Civil Platform. Vitaly PORTNIKOV, a prominent Ukrainian journalist. And Olena STYAZHKINA, historian and publicist. We're very happy to see you all here. Please come to the stage. Once again, thank you for accepting the invitation from the Kyiv Forum. On the 10th of October, the Geneva committee decided to award the war prize to the Center for Civil Liberties, the repressed Belarusian journalist Olena STYAZHKINA, and Memorial Human Rights Organization Russia. The committee said that the laureates represent civil society in their respective countries, and throughout the years they stood for their right to criticize the power that be and to defend civil rights. They did a lot to document war crimes, the violation of human rights, and abuses of the power. They reflect the powers of the civil society for peace, for the struggle for peace and democracy. It's symptomatic that Ukraine received not just one Nobel Prize, but we can say that two Ukrainian organizations were awarded. The thing is that the Kharkiv Human Rights Group, headed by Yevhen ZAKHAROV, is also a laureate, because you belong to the community memorial. So I would like to congratulate Mr. Zakharov and the Kharkiv group for on the occasion of that award. My first question, which is related to Belarus and Russia, is as follows. We see atrocities, bare-faced atrocities committed by Russia and Lukashenko's Belarus against Ukraine. In your opinion, will we be able to punish those who commit those atrocities, and how we can do this? Thank you very much. Danylo? I'd like to say that justice has no statute of limitations, and all the crimes committed should be punished. And for that to happen, we need to unite the efforts of all those that all this depends on. You have to gather evidence, to systematize it, to go to the court of law, to organize a court on the basis of adversarial system, and to establish a verdict. I can speak a lot about what opportunities exist for that now, but I'll be very brief. So many crimes have been committed that not a single legal system of any country would be able to digest, Ukrainian one included. So we have to do everything possible to record all those crimes, to gather all the relevant evidence, and to gradually include into the investigation all these pieces of evidence, bringing all that to logical conclusion and the verdicts. That's on the one hand, and on the other hand, we have to broaden the institutional capabilities to make this happen. What I mean by this? Well, first of all, it is absolutely key that everyone who is a victim of the war crimes should file a suit to the relevant bodies and to introduce these evidences in the relevant register, and to document the fact that this person is a victim of crime, so-and-so crime. Today I had an appointment with Prosecutor General Kostyn and his colleagues, and I was gratified to hear that he shares this view, that this should be done. And this registration and this record is absolutely indispensable, because in the future a situation may be such that compensations will be distributed between different victims, and we need to have legal basis to say that one person or another is really a victim of this or that crime. So we need to find proofs, to gather evidence, and to get all this documented. But this is not enough. All this information about the crimes and all the evidences should be united in one database, so that this information could be used for investigations. More than 30 organizations in Ukraine deal with human rights, and they back in March united into one organization, and in cooperation with the organization headed by Mrs. Matviichuk and the Ukrainian Helsinki Union and the Kharkiv Human Rights Group and others, And today, in the database in which they update jointly, there are more than 350, 35,000 war crimes.
Have agreed with the law enforcement authorities, provided them with information from our database, and they are ready to start investigation. Even more, we are ready to help them with this investigation, provide them with looking for witnesses, victims, and help them with other investigative activities. Also, such injecting more and more information into the investigation process makes it possible to enlarge the number of cases. But if it is done only within the framework of the national law enforcement system, this would take a lot of time. We are supportive of the position of the Prosecutor General's office that we need to set priorities and to investigate crimes related to murder, wounding people, torturing, those who were kidnapped. Only in our database, we have more than 3,500 cases of kidnapping. All this should be dealt with, and this should be priorities. But if we enlarge the number of investigators and those who are engaged into court litigations, we would have much better result. What do I mean? The very idea of setting up an international tribunal on investigation of the war crimes is supported by the state, and we support it. We believe that it is absolutely necessary, and we should move in this direction. The second, courts of other countries can also be engaged into these court litigations as well. We know that 20 procuracies in 20 countries are already investigating crimes against their citizens. They can get information from us, and they can be engaged not only in separate cases, but on a systemic basis, like, for example, Germany. The Kingdom of Netherlands gave an example when investigating the case of Boeing and Malaysian aircraft. And the more cases are regarded by courts in various countries, the better will be for Ukraine. There is another opportunity is to set up a hybrid tribunal. I mean that there must be a new chamber set up at the Supreme Court, which would investigate the military, the war crimes, and this chamber could consist of half of it of Ukrainian citizens and another half of the foreign representatives. That would be a good idea, but there are some issues related to this. First of all, it's not a cheap exercise, it's quite expensive. And the second, the amendments should be introduced into legislation if we are going to engage citizens of other countries into this investigation. And I think that legislation should be amended. The most important here is that the issue of justice, of bringing perpetrators to responsibility and prosecution of them depends, first of all, on ourselves. The more active we are, the quicker this will happen, the sooner this will take place. And I should say that such crimes like war crimes, crimes against humanity, do not have framework of term when it happened. And I should say, I will allow myself not to agree with Olesa, who spoke before me. She said that she wants our generation to be the last one which is struggling for freedom. But I must say that there has always been situations when people should fight for dignity, freedom, and liberties. This cannot be limited only with one generation. These people should always struggle for their human rights. And any state may be tempted to violate human rights. And if we do not keep tabs on the behavior of the state, it will always tend to violate the right. That's why this struggle for freedom, for human rights, for principles of law and rule of law should always take place. But it's important not to allow this turn into more gross violations, let's put it this way. And this especially becomes clear if we remember that on the 24th of February our country has not transformed. We used to have a lot of corruption. We now have a lot of corruption. And I'm filled with information on bad behavior of our government authorities in various spheres of our life, even now. And I must say that struggle for human rights during war is even more important than at peacetime, because at the wartime, these violations make much bigger impact, much stronger influence on victims of these violations. And I'm talking about violations in our state. That's why this should be done even now. Thank you very much. But where is this balance of our unity and wish to keep together during the wartime, and at the same time to make the authorities and the society understanding that these red lines should not be crossed? I mean, what you mentioned. First of all, back in 1988, my teacher and good friend Sergei Kovalov formulated a principle which he formulated as follows: the joint activities of people who have different visions. Where I agree with the authorities, I will work with them, I will support them. But where I do not agree with the authorities, where I see they violate human rights, I will do everything possible to resist them. This should be the major principle of the human rights protection and activism. During war times, situation is different, because every time we should think whether we must talk about this or that violations, because the enemy may use this information against our state, against our country. That's why we have to be very cautious about it and to think twice and thrice before making this information public. But if these violations are helping our enemies, aggressors, and I should say that in 2022 there were such cases, we must point publicly at these violations, at these offenses. I think that people present here understand what I mean. Thank you. I think that this is the difference between us and Russia, that we can say and we can tell our authorities what we want to say, being together, absolutely, and we are very supportive of our state in this struggle against the enemies to maximum possible extent. I want to say that we invited representatives of the authorities to this meeting, and I hope that the broadcasting of this talk is accessible to many people in the country. My next question is to Volodymyr Yermolenko. Volodymyr Yermolenko is a unique person. He does a lot for people in the world hear truth about Ukraine. At the same time, he is one of our leading volunteers. And my major question to Volodymyr is related to international relations, foreign policy. I see that the world is trying to understand Ukraine, to open Ukraine, for instance. A lot of intellectuals start saying that this is a Ukrainian century. The recent article in Bloomberg by the professor of the Johns Hopkins University that over the last 100 years it's a Ukrainian century, because for this or that way Ukraine has been in the center of all major conflicts, and the role and presence of Ukraine has been important, principally important. What do you think about the attitude of the world to Ukraine? Do you feel any changes, equality changes in the role of Ukraine in the world politics, and how can we preserve this role after our imminent victory? Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here. The world is very different. We cannot speak about the world as something uniform. We may speak about democratic countries, Western world, but the Western world also has its phantom pains. Let's remember about imperialistic past, 18th century, 19th century. It was very difficult times for colonized nations. And over the last decades, this Western world started losing belief in itself, as I think. They started losing belief into the strength of democracy, started losing belief into its military power. When we look at the Western world, we see a number of losses in Iraq, in Afghanistan. Though strange it is, Ukraine now is giving more feeling of strength to this Western world. It gives feeling that democracies are strong, that democracies, when they oppose authoritarianism, may be strong together as democracies. Because of the recent decade, we hear from Western intellectuals that the problems of democracy is the continuation of positive sides of democracy itself. And I don't like this approach because it's like flagellation, self-flagellation of democratic countries, sort of masochism. But democracies must show that they can be stronger than authoritarian societies, because in democracies, every citizen should feel his or her strong. This is what Václav Havel called strength without strength. But we also should not forget that apart from this Western world, there is another world, something which people call global South, though I don't like this idea, this notion, because it is too simplified. But this world very often looks at us not entirely understanding our struggle. They believe that the Western world is imperialistic. We want to be in the West. We want to be on the side of the empire and not to be on the side of their freedom. And here I think Ukraine gives an example, a very interesting example, how you can get out of the darkness, out of the oblivion, like when Woodrow Wilson said when he was asked, during the Paris peace process. What's without Russians? What's without Ukrainians? He said, maybe something is happening to them, but I don't know what.
The Ukrainian issue was not on the agenda back then, but now it is different, and we are gaining a new voice. This is a message to many countries of the world who feel marginalized somehow and whose voices are not being heard. And I think that this is very important. We keep addressing the Western world, our key allies, but we at the same time should try to find a voice for other countries as well, those who abstained during the vote in the General Security Assembly of the UN, for instance. Alexandra spoke about ordinary people who do extraordinary things. We travel across Ukraine a lot now, and we see this with our own eyes. We see people who help with the evacuation of civilians. We see volunteers who work close to the front line, who bring people to Kramatorsk, to Slavyansk. And this is not something that makes us different from the authoritarian world. In the democratic world, people say, who, if not me, and the authoritarian world says, may somebody do this, but not me. I think that the Western world also has a certain risk that you are too much reliant on something like the law or institutions or social welfare, and this is a risk which we are focusing on now when we say that structures and organizations are good, but the bottom line is about people and about individual decisions, because you can wait for the law to start working for centuries, but human decisions work here and now. I have lots of notes for my intervention, but I'd like just to add that the Ukrainian resistance shows that evil does exist. It may sound weird, but the free world for many decades thought that evil had long since been punished at the Nuremberg process and so on. And people were very cautious that probably some new neo-Nazis will grow up here and there. And now, for us, for people who speak with the outside world, it is absolutely key to do what we're trying to do now, that the evil of Nazism is really bad, but it does not mean that other forms of evil do not exist, and they may have other features. I've understood for myself what makes Russism different from Nazism. Nazism says that there are some categories of people who have right to live and some others who do not have this right to live, like Jews, Roma people, and so on. Whereas the Russian regime for centuries tell us nobody has the automatic right to live. It's only the party, Putin, or some other people at the top can decide whether you are going to live or to die. And I think this necrophilia type of regime in Russia is something that we are waking up to, and which shows to us that evil is never finally overcome. And it takes different forms and shapes. There's a lot of things that I can add, but I will stop at that. Don't you think that now we are at the decisive point at the front line? We every day feel for months that now we are at the decisive point in the world history when whether Ukraine will prevail makes an impact on the whole history of civilization. Back in the 30s, the loss of our independence resulted in cataclysms. Do you think that now there's a new understanding of this decisive point in history that hinges on whether Ukraine will prevail or not? Well, it depends. It depends on whom you are talking to. There are people who are very sympathetic with us, but sympathy is the end of it. Yesterday came from the East, and I had a meeting with the president of the PEN Society in Berlin. He also traveled in the regions close to the front lines, and he came to Kharkiv and donated a big fire truck. There are people who keep saying to Ukrainians, "You are heroes. You're better than us because you're capable of this heroism." It's as if they want to stand at the sidelines and admire the heroism that we demonstrate. It does happen. And when you are at home and you are watching television, I don't think that the message about our victory coming very soon, in a couple of weeks and so on, I think this message does not come across. I think we are here for the long haul. There are epochs of structures and there are epochs of history. The epochs of structure basically are about institutions, and the epoch of stories is when all this is ruined and we don't know where we are moving. Like Fukuyama said that he failed to notice in 1991 that history started, because in his understanding, history kind of stopped after the Second World War and after the process of colonization. From the 60s to the 90s, there was no history, and history came back in 1991, and he kind of missed that point. And now the process is getting sped up. Obviously, Ukraine now is breaking Russia's imperial structure. I'm sure that what Russia is now is a syndrome of a wounded empire which feels its weakness, and that makes it even more dangerous, just like it was the case with Hitler's Germany or Mussolini's Italy. But at the same time, Russia is trying to ruin the structure of the world, and to a certain extent they do manage to do this. I do support what Alexandra said, that Russia should be kicked out of the Security Council of the UN. But then it will mean that the United Nations will not encompass all the nations, and Russia will work on establishing an alternative UN, including Iran and some other countries. And this is also, at the same time, there's a huge number of countries which are not structured properly, which do not identify themselves as part of the Western world or the Russian sphere of influence, and they will try to create their own system. So I think the 21st century will not be a century of consolidation, but rather an increasing polarization of the world. And in this, Ukraine is really key, because the European world should understand that you can live in liberal values, in the values of freedom and at the same time say that you have to have strong military capabilities to be able to resist the enemy. So have this ethics or ethos of battle and not just the ethos of compromises. We have a roving microphone, so all those who would like to ask a question to the panelists, please go ahead. My question goes to Vitaly Portnikov. Well, basically what Volodymyr Yermolenko has been speaking about means that for some time, indefinitely, we are going to live in the conditions of global hurricane. We showed the roundtable footage in 2022 when Vitaly spoke about the necessity to consolidate and be strong. We're dreaming about our victory. We try to make it happen. Our military is doing this, but obviously there should be some kind of internal victory as well. A victory over corruption, a victory over some weaknesses of the society, a triumph over the attempts to do some authoritarian actions. What makes this internal effort so important in the circumstances of global hurricane? I totally subscribe to what Oleksandra said, that our victory will be absolutely worthless if we fail to set up a state of economic and civil liberties, a state in which an individual, a person will be respected. Because in the environment of war, people speak a lot about territories, but a state is about people. For years, we spoke about so-called little Ukrainians, as if there are little Ukrainians and great Ukrainians. But if the little Ukrainians were not sacrificing their lives day in and day out now, I wonder where the great Ukrainians would be now. Those who sign decrees, those who get together at high levels of power, they would be no more. The state is about people at large. And it is for those people that we are building our state, which should be also a kind of a shelter for Ukrainians. Our victory will mean nothing if this country is not Ukrainian in its essence, if it doesn't speak Ukrainian, if we fail to develop Ukrainian culture, if we fail to provide money for the development of Ukrainian science and culture, if people do not go to Ukrainian churches. In that case, it won't be a state, it'll be just a reclaimed territory. Then we will have to agree with what Putin said, that this war is a civil war. But this is not. This is a conflict of civilizations. One of my colleagues, commenting one of my speeches on television, said to me that it's strange that on the 24th of February, all the crazy ones proved to be right. But we were not crazy. We were just realistic. We just wanted our compatriots to get real, finally, and to get rid of the illusions which were shaped by the Russian invasion and occupation. The temporary government of Ukraine, the government of peasants and workers, was created by the Communist Party based in Moscow. And everything that happened on our land after that was nothing but fake and simulation. You would go to a Ukrainian school and there was no Ukrainian language, no Ukrainian culture. You, as a part of the Soviet Union, would take part in the occupation of other countries. You would go to churches and there was no God there because the church only appealed to you with the calls to support the state. You said that we are amidst the global hurricane now. This is not the first time. For centuries, the Ukrainian people, because it was occupied and weakened by another country, was on the wrong side of history.
And now, during this war, our compatriots are solving the very simple question: on which side of history we will remain after this clash of democracy and dictatorship. For so many years, we have been on that side of the equation, in spite of the fact that Ukrainian nation, with its values, history, discussions which started during Kyiv's times, has always wanted to be on the other side, and now people are sacrificing their lives and health for Ukraine to happen like this. And if in this situation we are not able to build a strong democratic and successful state, that would be the prosecution for all of us. And I have always been on the side of justice during all my life since childhood. When I saw when my compatriots from Kyiv, from around Kyiv, were Russified, when their language, their identity was taken from them, I thought, how could it be that when my own nation came back to the land where it didn't live for thousands of years, managed to build and defend its own state, how come that Ukrainians living on their own land cannot speak their own language, cannot study their own culture, cannot develop independently? This is unfair. The state, which is so unfair, should be ruined. But when I saw people who were ready to ruin the Soviet Union, dissidents from ex-Soviet republics, champions of democracy, I thought that all my dreams came true. On the 24th of August 1991, I thought this, but I knew that there was a long way ahead of us, that it's not enough to declare the state. It should be defended. Not many people thought that it could happen the same as it was with Israel. One day the independence declared, next day there was a war. We were given 30 years to prepare to this war, but unfortunately we have lost most of this time. But now, when we are facing this reality, we can improve a lot of things, and this is our obligation to our next generations. Ukraine is a very specific, very interesting civilization which has been existing, developing, and defending itself since ancient times, and it can do much more. I think this could be done even just for the sake of it, for the sake of this nation. And I think that that's enough to say this, not to make all this speech. Just remember the formula of a person who created this nation in conditions when the Ukrainian people were refused the right to exist. There will be a son, there will be a mom, there will be people on the land. Where else could you hear such words? Thank you. What's our event about? Our event is about Oleksandra Matviichuk and her mission. Our event is about international recognition of Ukraine. Our event is about prosecution of Russian, Belarusian criminals on our land, which Yevhen ZAKHAROV told us about. Our event is about the continuation of new quality of Ukrainian development, which Yermolenko said, about internal strength and internal quality, which Vitaly PORTNIKOV spoke about. And this will not be full without what Valeriy PEKAR can say about. I want to ask him to tell us about what he is doing professionally. And at the moment, he is engaged into a very difficult work, formulation of some new things, elements of the vision of a new Ukraine. I'd like him to share his vision. Thank you very much. I think that since the very first days of aggression, Ukrainian society has never had a fear of military defeat. But now we all have another fear, a fear that everything will come back as it was before the war. Why should we speak right now about Ukraine after the victory? For 4 reasons. First, the picture of the future is gathering social energy. Those who are losing their spirit, having seen this picture of the future, might have their spirits raised. Then this picture should be shown to our international partners who are ready to fund the restoration of Ukraine after the war. And the third, we should show this picture of the future to those people who left Ukraine. If they don't see a correct picture of the future, they will not come back. And the fourth reason is that window of opportunities is not going to be too wide. It will be small as usual, and we must be prepared for doing all this. That's why we have a number of social society initiatives in order to draft public policy documents necessary after the victory. And today in this hotel, the big process of dialogues on public policy started in the framework of the initiative of Ukraine after victory. This will be dozens of working meetings, expert meetings, and that's why more than 220 NGOs signed back in July declaration manifesto of this civil society on principles after the victory, the so-called Lugano Declaration. But it sounds almost like Luhansk Declaration. Here we see millions of people, but after Oleksandra Matviichuk, you cannot say much. It's important that small copy of Russia will not resist big copy of Russia. And I think that everybody would agree that Ukraine stood because it is not a copy of Russia. It's different. It's democratic. But here we're talking about the future of Ukraine. But let's speak about the future of Russia, because there is a very important question. What after Ukrainian victory? Theoretician of strategy said that the victory is the world which is better than the previous one, at least from your point of view. The question is, when we come back to international recognized borders, would this world be better than the previous one? That would be the same world, because Russia, with its aggressive attitude, will remain with the masses of population which is brainwashed with the propaganda. Let's say the best world would be if Russia, after Ukrainian victory, would not be able to threaten Ukraine again. Otherwise, that would be just a truce between two wars, like between First and Second Chechen Wars, or between the First and the Second World Wars. And then there is another opinion. Let's build a huge wall between the countries, but the missiles may fly over the walls. That's why we should say that it's not enough to be victorious at the battlefield. It's important to make it this way, that Russia would never threaten Europe, Ukraine, and the world. And for this, two very important principles should be combined: peace and justice. In the West, we hear voices that these are opposite things. If you want peace, forget about justice. If you want justice, forget about peace. No, justice is drawing conclusion after the war, which will continue for many days, and the peace is something which should be done for the next war not to happen again. Many European nations have a slogan, never again, and this should be Ukrainian slogan as well. And that's why that all the war crimes, genocide crimes should be prosecuted. But it's not enough. The measures are necessary to be taken for sustainable peace. The internal political changes should take place in Russian Federation, which we all understand very well is not a real federation, but it's an empire, because there are a lot of nations within Russia which are enslaved. We know this very well. We used to be enslaved ourselves. This is overcoming the imperialistic past of Russia in the history, information, overcoming Western policy and diplomacy stereotypes vis-a-vis Russia. We all know them. And again, let's be outspoken. Change of the international energy balance for the oil autocracies never be able to threaten the world energy again, and transformation of international security architecture. In conclusion, I would say, which may differ from my colleagues, but it's my personal opinion, until Russian Empire exists, the Ukraine is threatened. Thank you. Only peaceful decolonization of the empire and transformation of post-imperialistic space on the peaceful basis, denuclearization, demilitarization, human rights protection, exclusively peaceful resolution of all conflicts, and implementation of the founding statutory documents of the UN on the rights of all nations for self-determination. Only this would ensure peace in Ukraine, in Georgia, in Moldova, in Kazakhstan, Baltic states, Central and Eastern European states, the whole Europe and the whole world. Thank you. We all probably single-minded on these issues. And Ukrainian political opinion, like Mykola Yakhnovsky, Stepan Rudnitsky, is also of the same. There is one more line of our meetings, a day of unity. I was born in Lviv. Olena STYAZHKINA was born in Ukrainian Donetsk. And what Valeriy PEKAR said is the point on which I'd like you to speak. A point on Russia. Russians understand everything perfectly. I don't believe that Russians don't understand what's going on. I don't believe that they are all brainwashed. They understand very well everything. What should Ukraine say today to the Russian world? Can this evil be forgiven someday? I would say no, no, and go out. But before this event, I returned from a trip where I met with our warriors, talked to them on what can we say to Russia, what should we say to Russia. They asked me to say the following: the best what we can say to the Russian people is said by our weapons. The more weapons we have, the more languages, English, French, Spanish, Danish, will be heard by Russian people, and maybe learn not to rape, not to kill, not to cross borders, and not to take others' territories. because guns are the best dictionary for the gun fodder. One psychologist says that in order to put a diagnosis on psychological disorder of a personality, at least you should find this personality, at least recognize that this personality exists. So when we're speaking about what we can say to Russian people, first we should try to find these people. And I think that this is not that easy task.
Because it's very difficult to find the Russian people, because the Russian nation, as a people, is not a historic entity that has agency. And they are even happy about it, because this paradigm of a little person, which so carefully nurtured by the so-called great Russian culture, whereas other cultures were nurturing the paradigm of heroes, the paradigm of individual growth and being a master of your own fate. It's totally different. In 1852, two texts on the same subject matter were written. The first one was the Moo Moo book, when a villager has a landlady. A landlady is very cruel, and this janitor has a puppy, and the landlady orders him to drown this dog, and carried bitches to Uncle Tom's cabin, about a slave, about his owners. Some slaves are ready to run off, and Tom says that I will resign with my fate, and he ended up with the he ends up with in a situation where he should become a kind of a beast for people like him, and he decides not to do this. Whereas Gerasim, that janitor in that book, he decides to drown the dog because the landlady just ordered him so. So if we think about what is going on with the Russian people, you will see that it's a non-existent notion in the national or ethnic meaning of the word. We have some kind of association of the Buryats or Tuvins. They do not speak Russian. Are they Russian people? Is there anything for us to talk with them about? And in general, is there such a political construct as the political Russian language? Maybe it does exist, but it cannot be translated into Ukrainian or any other, say, Western language. Because its specifics is not just about what Orwell wrote about that peace is war and freedom is slavery. No, it's much more complicated. In their culture it is, no, war is not war, this is peace. There's not even a binary opposition between the notions. This is kind of a language of some kind of strange tribal-like formation. And so their language, political and social, is structured in such a way that they're not ashamed of this, because lies have become a norm of their existence. And for the Western world, they have learned certain right words and concepts and notions which they operate, but just because that use is beneficial for them, because the West is trying to rationalize this, but the West fails to understand that the meaning that they put into those notions is totally different from the Western one. So that language is a kind of a trap, and if you try to rationalize it, you would always come to the wrong conclusion, and which will lead you to wrong actions. And there are some more points that probably are not very well suited for this event. When we speak about Russia as an empire, we use the templates that we are accustomed to. But it is unique in its form, because this is about hordes, this is about tribes, this is about primitive formations. It's only the facade of their livelihood is imperial, but otherwise it's very primitive, something that goes back centuries and centuries back. And even if you take away all the extra things, all the obfuscation and so on, it becomes clear that the point of their existence lies in the search for grandeur, which they try to acquire through killing others. And this grandeur, through murders, is built into the literary context, in the political context, and even in the everyday domestic context of their homes. So what should we say to the Russian language? There's nobody to talk to, and there's no subject to speak about. And the second point is about forgiveness. A wonderful Ukrainian psychologist, Irina Agilzon, who came from the Crimea in 2014, carried out a survey. Whom in Russia do you expect to apologize to you? And the multiple choice was war criminals, intelligentsia, opinion leaders, relatives and friends, people you communicate with on social media and so on. And when people answered that question, they said that there's one point missing: from nobody. From nobody, because we don't expect apologies from anybody in Russia. And that was the largest category of respondents. 72% of people said that they are not expecting any apologies from anyone in Russia. And that means that we are not going to get into the paradigm of forgiveness, because forgiveness is about human beings. It's about human values, because really we should not become like our enemies. And forgiveness is about human beings. But if a crocodile bites off your arm, would you try to forgive the crocodile for that? Or in the Christian belief, is there any point in forgiving devil or Satan? Should you take into account that the Satan had very difficult childhood and had to deal with a lot of problems as he was shaped? So when we are talking about forgiveness, we are not talking about the forgiveness of viruses. But for the sake of fairness, I'd like to add that there is a small number, not many, but some Russian people who are on our side, and not on our side sitting on couches somewhere in the comfort of their homes, but at the front line, or working for volunteer organizations. And we do not know their names because they do not advertise their work. We get to know about them only when they get to die at the front line. Only then we know the names of those people, but not otherwise. This kind of people, they do work on the issue of forgiveness. They work on their consciousness. They want to absolve themselves of that sin. If we said to them, we forgive you, that would not be sufficient for them, not because they don't want our forgiveness, but because the burden which weighs heavy on their souls cannot be removed by our forgiveness. They believe themselves to be more sinful than our forgiveness can imply. Maybe a new Willy Brandt is growing somewhere in Russia. But I'm one of those who do not believe in that. And I believe that we have to tell to our grandchildren that Russians will be this way always. Well, maybe in 50 years or some other time down the road, maybe. But if we are speaking about security at the Security Forum, our task is to teach to our children and grandchildren that they have to be vigilant, because Russians are capable of doing it over and over again. Let's err on the side of caution. It's better to be cautious than to be dead. I would like to conclude on the topic of Russia. So we give the floor to those who would like to say something in the audience, and we have a roving mic for that. We've touched upon a lot of issues today. Oleg Panyuta, I'm a journalist. We, all those present here, are aware of the fact that Ukraine needs peace and not a ceasefire, truce. But is the world aware of the fact that there can be a world without Russia? I would like to put this question to each member of the panel. No, unfortunately, the world is not aware of this, that this can be. A lot of countries cannot imagine the world without Russia. Moreover, a lot of countries still believe in fakes spread by Russia, and I can give you relevant examples of that. So we have to work a lot towards what you said. Valeriy PEKAR. As long as the world does not have a picture of the post-war system in the world, the war cannot stop. Unfortunately, the war will go on until the world has a clear picture of the world order after the war. And that means that American, British, European, the Kazakh and other elites should answer the question what the world is going to be like after Ukraine's victory. What the world will be like if Ukraine fails, and thank God this will never happen because of our army. The world understood that, but we need to have a world picture after our victory. This picture does not exist now. We have to prod the democratic world and free democratic countries towards seeing that picture, and then the war will finish. Volodya. After Davos, I have a feeling that basically the West managed to live through this winter without Russia. Are you trying to say that they have to understand that they can live through spring, summer, and on and on and on without Russia? Yes, exactly. Well, there are people who have the force of empathy and can feel the pain of others. But these people will always be a minority. Most people just follow in the wake of their experience. That's why in the Middle East, the best way to go about it is to speak in terms of what Assad is all about, what Syrian regime is all about, and through those notions to explain what is going on in this part of the world. So we have to appeal to some kind of relevant experience. That's why it's so easy for us to speak to Poles, Latvians, Lithuanians, Estonians, and it's less easy for us to talk to Germans, for instance. So we have to gradually prepare the world to the fact that Russia should be different from what it is now, including in size. Let's make Russia small again, as one person very aptly said. When you come to the French and you ask them, do you remember the way France was back in the 18th century? Describe all those territories. And then we say, let's cut down Russia at least to the size of France. And they first they don't understand what's going on, and then they try to rationalize this.
The same with Germans, the same with Spaniards, who in the 16th century had a huge empire. Now it is small. So I think we have to move forward step by step, gradually. First, we should say that Russian Federation is not a federation, it's an empire with a centralized power. Let's make real federation of it. 80-something subjects, each of them would have its own parliament, and let's see how they would cope with that. I don't think they would cope, but for the world, that would be less shocking news. And then maybe they would, it would shrink to at least French territory, the size of French territory. I want to say 2 or 3 points. As a person who lived in Russia longer than all people gathered here on this podium, first of all, there will be no ceasefire. Don't be afraid. It's not because we don't want it or the West doesn't want it. Russia will never want any ceasefire with the territory which it believes it's their land. The second, there are no such sacrifice which Russian people or Russian political elite would not bear for the sake of getting somebody's lands, especially if they think that this is their lands. In the West, people do not understand it, but we understand this very well. We cannot imagine the level of such sacrifice, but if you may imagine the wars which Russia had, Russia or war in 12th year, they wanted to get the Poland. Napoleon let Poland be free. That's why Russia was against Napoleon. Same for 1941, 1945, the Great Patriotic War, which was part of the Second World War, which ended not at the border of Russia of the Soviet Union, but ended with grabbing half of Europe. Millions of people, millions, which were uncomparable with the liberation of Russian Federation, were killed during the battle for Berlin, because it was about the sphere of influence. And sphere of influence for them is a sacred thing for which they're ready to sacrifice millions of human lives. But we should understand this, and the world doesn't understand it. And we should orient towards not the world without Russia, but toward the world of security, where Russia would think about getting some other territories, territory of Kazakhstan, of Caucasus. That's why we must be where Poles, Hungarians, Czechs are together, Western countries together with North America. We should sit and watch. We should not be on the scene, but we should sit and watch from the side at what's going on. Only then we might think about any ways to reduce Russia or defederalize it. But now our major task is to do something for Russia not to destroy us, not to change Russia, not to change Russian people and their attitude to those 10 to 15% of non-Russian population which will remain there, but to defend ourselves from them. That's the most important thing. For this not to be so scary, because I was scared by what you said. As a historian, I would like to remind you that in the Second World War, the country one which got Lend-Lease. Now, this country is Ukraine. Thank you, Madam Ambassador. As a writer, as an author, I have a right for magical thinking. I want to say that this territory on both sides of Ural Mountains may surprise us, as it surprised us in 1991. So, yes, vigilance and security and defense is important, but we have a right for a little wonder anyway. Thank you very much. Our meeting is coming to an end, and I would like to try to answer this question, the world without Russia. I'm sure that the world can easily live without, survive and exist without Russian Empire. But the world will never survive without truth, justice, democracy, without freedom, and without Ukraine. I want to thank Oleksandra Matviichuk, Yevhen ZAKHAROV, Yevgeny PEKAR, Volodymyr YERMOLENKO, Vitaly PORTNIKOV, Olena STYAZHKINA, and our heroes from Azov. Thank you very much.